On March 2nd, 1933, audiences were first introduced to an iconic monster envisioned by director Marion C. Cooper, King Kong. It was a tale of adventure, romance, and tragedy, and with rich, groundbreaking visual effects that were unlike anything ever seen on the big screen. Many famous directors such as Peter Jackson and Steven Spielberg were inspired by it, as was I. In fact, I still own the VHS copy of the movie, and even attempted to make my own version not once, but twice.
Studio that I'm going to finish this movie soon.
You can't, Carl, because the studio won't let you make any more movies.
I don't care. Listen, there are millions of girls out there, and one of them was destined to play this role. You go down to the docks, and I'll go to the harbor. Got it?
Okay.
Naturally, Kong had a profound impact on me, as it was what made me want to become a filmmaker and still holds the honor of being my favorite film. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. The best place to start, as always, is at the beginning. Filmmaker Carl Denham embarks on a sea voyage with actress Ann Darrow and a group of sailors to a mysterious island to film a movie. Not long after they arrive at their destination, Anne is kidnapped by the natives who sacrifice her to their god, a giant gorilla named Kong, who in turn takes her far into the jungles of the island. Carl Denham, sailor Jack Driscoll, and a group of other men go into the jungles to save her and encounter other horrors on the island. After recapturing Anne, Carl is able to knock out Kong with a gas bomb and takes him back to New York to put him on a show. Needless to say, everything goes horribly wrong. Kong escapes, recaptures Anne, and climbs to the top of the Empire State Building. He is eventually taken out by airplanes, and Kong falls to his death. Many surround the body of Kong, including Carl. When he is told that the airplanes got him, Carl simply remarks that it wasn't the airplanes, but it was beauty that killed the beast. That's a big part of the film, where Denham says that his film is about Beauty and the Beast, where it's heavily acknowledged that he knows of Kong's existence, but the irony in it is it actually happens when things don't go according to plan, and that Kong really does become smitten by Anne, a real-life Beauty and the Beast story. It should go without saying that the acting from the three major players, Fay Wray, Robert Armstrong, and Bruce Cabot, do a great job with their roles, each being completely different from each other, but it's Kong, the 18-inch puppet, that steals the show. You might be wondering, how does Kong have a character if he's just a puppet? Well, that all goes to the credit of animator Willis O'Brien, who put much of himself into the character. You can see the curious nature of Kong when he encounters Anne for the first time, or when he plays with the jaws of the dead T-Rex. He has some bewildered moments too, such as when Jack Driscoll stabs his hand, or when he doesn't know what to make of Anne's clothes. I think his character is best shown right before he dies, where he doesn't know what to make of the bullets he received from the planes, and when he sadly holds Anne one final time on the Empire State Building, fully aware that he's about to die. So yes, Kong 100% counts as a character in the film, and that all goes to the credit of Willis O'Brien. But it wasn't just Kong who was the basis for a real-life individual. Ruth Rose, who wrote the final draft of the script, put herself into Ann Darrow, while Robert Armstrong was strongly modeled after the director, Marion C. Cooper. In real life, Cooper made countless films regarding the jungle and animals in it. He grew up with stories of gorillas in Africa carrying off women into the jungles, and was also very much against adding love stories in his films, just like Carl Denham. Even the co-director Ernest Schoedsack was partially the inspiration for Jack Driscoll. We'll get more into the behind-the-scenes history later, because there's a ton I'd love to talk about, but for now, we'll go over the main positives of the film. First and foremost, the effects are astounding. The fact that Willis O'Brien, Marcel Delgado, and the other animators had 55 weeks to complete it all is mind-blowing to me. They had to make the armatures, the miniature sets and people, and even the life-size Kong head, hand, and foot. All of this during the Great Depression, it's all simply incredible. And there were problems. The bright lights would alter the puppets, particularly Kong a lot of the time, and you can even see Kong's face change quite a bit in the film, presumably because of this. Again, we'll get more into the effects later, so we'll start off with how good the three main actors are. Two of the main actors, Robert Armstrong and Fay Wray, were already working on an RKO film during Kong's development, so they would work half the day on Kong and another half of the day on the other film, The Most Dangerous Game. Bruce Cabot, on the other hand, was apparently a waiter at the time, with some acting credits beforehand. All of them do a good job in the film, and work off each other well, with Cabot playing a gruff but likable hero, Ray as probably the best scream queen to ever grace the screen, and, my favorite, Armstrong as the headstrong but also likable filmmaker Carl Denham, who's not only my favorite character in the film, but among my top 3 fictional characters in all of cinema. Armstrong brings a ton of passion and energy to the screen. Whenever he's in a scene, all eyes are directed on him, and you can see the gears turning in his head, planning his next move on what to do or say. In some ways, he is despicable with what he does, like not telling anyone where they're going on the trip, but he's also brave, being in charge along with Driscoll on the mission to save Anne in the jungles of the island. He's a man who knows what he wants, even if it's not the best of ideas, but damn it, he'll find a way to reach his goal, even if that goal is a giant gorilla. So yes, while the other two actors are wonderful, I will say it is Robert Armstrong who steals the show. Aside from Kong, of course. Now, another thing that is impressive with the film is the musical score that was done by Max Steiner, who was a famous composer of the golden age of Hollywood. It's suspenseful, classical, and exciting, almost all at the same time. Also, Steiner was the one who introduces the idea of matching music to on-screen action, which was not really seen at the time. A good example of this is when the Chief is walking towards the crew of the Venture. Step by step, the music becomes more and more ominous as the Chief approaches, and it's a great testament to Steiner's work. The general story is simplistic, with characters going to an island and coming across a monster, but the build-up to Kong is done well, and as soon as we get to the island, the excitement starts to ramp up. From the natives, to Kong, and then to the various dinosaurs. It's a prime example of a great adventure film, and gets even better once Kong arrives in New York, and him climbing the Empire State Building, which was the tallest building in the world at the time, has now become one of the most iconic moments in film history. Even if you have not seen Kong, you're at least aware of the moment a giant gorilla climbs atop the building. It's cinema gold. The only real cons I have with the film are minor. One is that while Fay Wray is the lord of all scream queens, it does become a tad bit annoying after a while. Almost every scene she is in with Kong, there's a loud scream. Granted, I probably would as well in this situation, but it's still tiring to say the least, and I feel bad for her vocal cords. Also, the love plot does come off as very forced, and does come out of nowhere. That might be because Cooper himself was never interested in love stories in films, which is translated by what we know about Cooper and how Carl Denham, who is based on him, also feels the same. There's only a few scenes where Driscoll and Anne are together, and then all of a sudden they go from disliking each other to kissing on the Venture. I could just never buy it, but to be fair, I'm also positive Cooper didn't care for it either. But I just thought I should bring this up, as I do find it somewhat ridiculous. But there's also a major elephant in the room that we need to talk about, and that is the subject of race. While this was made in the 30s, there are some more questionable elements in the film, whether it be the natives, Charlie the Asian cook, or even Kong himself, who was a dark-skinned monster carrying off a white woman. Not to knock Kong down a few pegs, or a few buildings in his case, but as soon as the natives show up, it borders on cringe-level territory, whether it is the stereotypical outfits, the Kong dancers, or anything about them. Cooper doesn't put them in the best of lights. Hell, Denham even cracks a joke about how scarce blondes are on the island, and even the Asian cook Charlie refers to them as crazy black men. In essence, Kong becomes a slave. He's taken from his home and put on display before the white man. He escapes, and his punishment is death. Look, I want to still reiterate that I love the film, but like my review for Breakfast at Tiffany's, I can't sit idly by with this, even if the excuse that comes up in the comments is, it was the 1930s, give it some slack. But I can't do that. This is the con section of the review after all, and if something is not good, I'm going to point it out, and this is definitely not good. Now we go back to the big subject, the effects. The effects alone are what got me into film and wanting to learn how films were made. This might be more of a different thing I've done for my reviews, but the effects are arguably what made Kong famous, and Willis O'Brien and his team do not seem to get enough credit in film history, so I'm going to talk a lot about them, starting now. In the early days of film, Willis O'Brien was fiddling around with some clay figures and a camera, and after experimenting, he basically created a process called stop-motion animation, which was taking a picture of an object, moving it slightly, taking another picture, and then after doing that for a long period of time, you get the illusion of the object moving on its own. O'Brien was financed to make some small projects by the man who invented the motion picture camera, Thomas Edison. One of O'Brien's earlier projects was a short called The Dinosaur and the Missing Link, which had a character that seemed to be a precursor to Kong. Later on, O'Brien began to work at RKO with a friend named Marcel Delgado and started on a film called Creation. It was about a group of people who get stranded on an island filled with dinosaurs. Work on the project lasted almost a year, but then there came along an ambitious director named Marion C. Cooper, who wanted to make a film about a giant gorilla but had no idea how to make it a reality. Cooper looked at Creation, and while he hated it, something clicked in his brain, and that was the realization that O'Brien was the one who could make his gorilla film work. Cooper had Creation cancelled and brought O'Brien, Delgado, and the rest of the special effects team onto his film, which was currently titled The Beast. All of the dinosaurs that were originally made for Creation were moved over to The Beast, which we'll now refer to as Kong. Delgado started to work on Kong, and O'Brien was given the credit of chief technician. There were some disagreements between O'Brien and Cooper right off the bat. On the island, Kong was supposed to be 18 feet tall, but Cooper wanted him to be taller in the New York scenes, making him 24 feet tall. They also clashed on Kong's personality. O'Brien wanted to give Kong some humorous moments in order to make him more sympathetic. However, Cooper wanted Kong to simply be a savage beast. Apparently, the fights would get so tense that O'Brien would walk off the set. But aside from the stop motion, other technical achievements were made. Rear screen projection would be used for multiple scenes. It was a process in which previously filmed background scenes were projected from behind and onto a translucent screen that allowed the image to appear on both sides. One example of this was the fight between the Rex and Kong, which took 7 weeks to complete. The stop motion was done first, then Fay Wray would sit in a fake tree and react to the battle projected onto the screen, while the camera filmed her reactions. For the log scene, the sailors of the Venture were filmed on a full-scale log in front of a blue screen, which was then composited with the Kong puppet that was filmed on a miniature set. For Kong's reveal on stage, the interior was filmed inside an auditorium. Actors were on the stage and extras were in the seats. All of Kong's animation was filmed and then matted in. And the last piece of behind-the-scenes trivia involves the beautiful matte paintings. The technique consisted of having flat art elements in order to create an illusion of depth. Glass in front of the set had painted foreground details, and 2 to 3 pieces of glass that were aligned in a certain way had extra pieces of painted jungles. Real elements were also used, such as grass and leaves. This tremendously helped to give a 3-dimensional feel to Kong's environment. While O'Brien and his team would not get as much recognition as they deserved, O'Brien would later win an Oscar for his work on another Marion C. Cooper guerrilla film, Mighty Joe Young. During that film, O'Brien was training the next legendary stop-motion animator, Ray Harryhausen, who helped keep these type of effects alive and well, and, as said earlier, inspire others to keep stop motion alive. To some, King Kong is just a black and white monster movie with corny effects, but in reality, it's full of innovative techniques for special effects, and without it, filmmaking might very well be completely different than it is today. As soon as I saw Kong emerge from the trees to pick up Aunt Darrow, my mind was racing with questions on how this was done. Nowadays, the answers are just computer effects, but there's so much mystery regarding the process of making this landmark film, and every time I watch it, I fall more and more in love with the film. It's inspired me as a lover of film, of stop motion, and creative storytelling, and all of those reasons and more are why this eighth wonder of the world is still my favorite film of all time.